G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today we're going to be talking about Daemon engines in 30k. So, Daemon engines themselves are a pretty interesting sort of subset of units. I have a copy that I was lent of the Imperial Armour Volume 13, where a lot of these Daemon engines are present. And this is sort of the watered-down version of that document. We don't have things like, Plague Hulks and Plague Crawlers, and we don't have the, is it the Blood Slaughterer, I think it is, that giant Lord of Skulls thing. What else don't we have? We don't have Blight Drones and a few other things along the way. But what we do have in here are a couple of the more fun and interesting Daemon engines. Now, they suffer in the rules department, let's make no bones about that. But we'll talk to it in the relevant sections, because some of the units are pretty, well, decent. And if you're looking to add some spice, some pizzazz, as it were, to your army, and you want to do something a little bit out of the ordinary, you want to have something that provides a similar power set, typically, to Dreadnoughts. These units may be a choice for you if you're a trader player. Now, it is a Legion Praevian who can take these particular units. If you're playing as the Legiones Astartes, if you're playing as the Mechanicum, they basically just become a part of your list if you're a traitor. Now, if you take them as a Legiones Astartes, which is the more interesting of them, the Legion Praevian unlocks it, and he can take a unit of these, if they're available as a unit, or a single one of them, if they're not available as a unit, and he's able to make them his retinue instead. Now, he doesn't join them like he would with, say, Castellax or Vorax. Instead, he just mills around the battlefield as a Legion Praevian does, and this unit goes off to do its own thing. But the interesting part about it is that it gains the Legiones Astartes option of that legion, or specifically the Praevian that you picked, which is very interesting because there are some pretty good ones out there. Iron Hands, obviously, is a really good one because anything that's a high toughness unit is going to become pretty much untargetable. If it's, say, toughness 6, it's going to become immune to strength 3 weapons. For example, if it is shot by those weapons, if it is an Iron Hand unit. There might be something like Trophies of Judgment type things, although you can't take Legion War Gear, but you can pair it up with certain Legion's special rules and abilities, which will work out quite nicely. Different Legions will get different mileage out of that rule, though. A very different mileage out of those rules. So, in here you get the Corrupted Engine subtype. It's not great, but it's not terrible. You're going to get Fear 1. That Fear aura around the unit is good for lowering the general leadership of other units in the area, which is very, very useful if you stack it with other things that are damaging leadership, such as, say, Night Fight, or weapons that have the Shell Shock special rule. If you can get him nearby, combine these things together, you can force enemies to take incredibly bad morale checks, very poor odds of them passing those checks. You are, however, very, very, very susceptible to weapons that have the Force or Psychic Focus special rules, because they're going to gain instant death against you. And whilst that's not going to affect the super heavy Lords of War types, since pretty much all of the units in this list that aren't the Khitan pretty much have, or aren't the Brass Scorpion, have wounds, yeah, there's something to be a bit concerned about. And you will suffer multiple wounds in instances of taking instant death. You won't lose all of them instantly, but you will still take D3 wounds for each one. And you can't join units that don't have the Corrupted Engine subtype. It's all the sort of corrupted rules that we've seen before with the likes of Word Bearers or things to that effect. Now, moving on from those couple of special rules that aren't very exciting, to be honest, we get into some additional Cyberthurgy powers here. So we have Cyberthurgic Rite of Animatus Malevolence and the Amthea Excrucius. Now, the Malevolence is by far the better ability. You're going to get additional weapon skill, you're going to move a number of inches towards the enemy equal to your initiative, which none of them are super high, but hey, it's free movement. And improve your invulnerable save up to a maximum of 3+. Typically, you're going to find it's a 4+, which is, pretty good. So all of those things are going to make the unit a lot better. However, you're going to have to be very close, 12 inches. That's very close to these particular units to pull it off. The Cybertheurgic weapon, Strength 5, AP 3, Assault 3, Blind, Deflagrate, and Cybertheurgic Focus. Yeah, it's pretty underwhelming. A little bit dangerous. If you fail your check with it, you're going to take Cybertheurgic feedback and, well, yeah, lose a weapon type thing. So stay away from it. Then we move into the Etheric Dominion. So Etheric Dominions are a thing with Demons of the Ruinstorm in their different incarnations, and they're a thing here. Now in Demons of the Ruinstorm, you get to pick the different Etheric Dominions to suit your army, to tailor it towards a particular god or something to that effect. But since Demon Engines are really just spicy batteries in a robot shell, you are just told what you're going to get, the Heedless Slaughter or the Malevolent Artifice. Now, the Heedless Slaughter is supposed to buff you in close combat, gives you an additional modifier to combat resolution, +1 to your charge distance, +1 to sweeping advance, which won't affect heavy units, which we'll talk about later, and that's kind of it. It's forcing you to charge, which is always a negative, especially if you have interesting shooting attacks, and, well, it's just kind of underwhelming. Whereas Malevolent Artifice, getting reroll all failed armor saves, taking its wounds resolved at a strength value lower than your unmodified toughness, that is pretty handy. If you're able to stack that with the Cybertheurgic power, with better invulnerable saves, you can become somewhat tanky as a unit. And there is nothing stopping, say, I know this is gamey, forgive me, but as an example of a way that this could be performed, is taking this as a Legiones Astartes Iron Hands traitor unit with the additional strength modifier to enemy weapons, and then taking Mechanicum forces who are traitor Mechanicum and combining their Cybertheurgic powers with this. You can get some interesting stacks of abilities. Nothing that's going to be too crazy or overpowered, but there is the scope there if you are willing to invest the time and the miniatures in it for that Hail Mary attempt at awesomeness. So going on from there, we now get into the Demon Engines themselves, and the very first one here is the Khitan. Now this is essentially the top half of the Lord of Skulls plastic kit, mated with the bottom half of, well, it's called the Khitan. It is essentially a pair of legs for the old Khorne unit, the Lord of Skulls. And that set of legs is going to turn it into an Imperial Knight of sorts. And it's probably the best knight in the game if you actually sort of think about the stats of it, the weapon that it's armed with, and its actual performance. The Cleaver of Slaughter that it's armed with is going to give you a Strength 10 AP2 Brutal 3 weapon with Shred, pretty good for killing dreadnoughts and the such. You do only have 4 attacks, but with Rampage, Hammer of Wrath 4, you can throw some decent numbers out there in a good turn. You are going to be benefiting from the Heedless Slaughter Etheric Dominion, so slight buffs to getting those charges off in the first place, and with Movement 14, yeah, you can get those charges off. Also, the Khitan Gatling Gun, or Gatling Cannon, I should say, Strength 6, AP 4, 36 inches range, 18 pinning shell-shocking rounds. Add to that, you are yourself corrupted, so you're going to cause fear. So this thing has a weapon that is pinning with a -2 modifier to the pinning if you get within range for your fear to affect the enemy unit. That's a pretty good stack of abilities right there. So the Khitan is, at least from a firepower point of view, not too shabby. Strength 6 AP4, this is an basically a whole unit of Solar Auxilia will die to this thing in a shooting phase, and whatever doesn't is going to be taking Leadership 5, if they're lucky, leadership checks, which is a pretty nasty thing in and of itself. And of course, it's got all the other benefits of being a knight. So as far as things go, this is probably the best knight in the game, and weapon skill 6 is definitely nothing to sniff at. The only downside, ballistic skill 3, which, you know, you're going to fire 18 shots, you're only going to hit half of them. That's the downside of that sort of ballistic skill. But if you buff this thing again, certain abilities, you can get that weapon skill up to 7. Like, woof, nasty unit. And going on from there, we get to the Greater Brass Scorpion. And the Greater Brass Scorpion is kind of trash. When I say kind of trash, you're paying similar points to the Khitan. You're getting a much slower unit, and it has less powerful close combat attacks. The Hellcrusher Claws are going to give you Strength 10, AP 2, but only Brutal 2. So a Dreadnought, a regular Contemptor Dreadnought, will actually cause more wounds with its attacks than you will. And on top of that, it's getting Sunder. So, okay, additional armor penetration buffs against vehicles. But vehicles, I mean, you're already Strength 10. You know, you don't need a huge amount of buffs to try and break open vehicles. Whereas something like a Dreadnought is not going to be affected by your Sunder. And they have as many or more attacks than the Greater Brass Scorpion. So we have some issues there. You're really relying on the Rampage to try and get the attacks up, because 3 is just a pitifully low number for a giant demon engine of Khorne. This thing's the size of, well, how would I describe the size of it? It's bigger than a Baneblade. So they're pretty big brass scorpions. And firepower-wise, I think they're trying to use that to make up for it. So you've got 2 Hellmaw Cannon, right? They're on your whole front. Now, the Hellmaw Cannon is a Strength 7, AP 4, Assault 1, Torrent 6 inches weapon. Very, very similar to the Inferno Cannon, and pretty trash in this edition. Strength 7, AP 4, yes, it can absolutely slaughter through Solar Auxilia, just like the previous unit can, but you've got to get a lot closer than the previous unit to it, and you're not going to have the pinning attacks and shell shock of those attacks. So on a firepower for firepower basis, that's not too great. You also have the turret-mounted Scorpion Cannon. Now the Scorpion Cannon it's on the cusp of greatness. 30 inches range, Strength 5, AP 4, Assault 9, Pinning Shred, but it's half the firepower of the previous unit, slightly better ballistic skill, and you're not getting shell shock. So again, it doesn't have the numbers to do it, and it's a much lower, well, it's a lower strength than the previous attacks. And this wouldn't be too much of a comparison if the points were not less for the Khitan. The Khitan, of course, also moving 30% faster than the Greater Brass Scorpion. In addition to this, the Greater Brass Scorpion has the Sentinel-mounted Despoiler Cannon. What is a Despoiler Cannon? It is a worse version of the Vindicator's Demolisher Cannon. 24 inches range, Strength 10, not Strength 12, AP 3, Ordnance 1, Blast 3 inches, with Sunder, Rending 5+, and Brutal 3. So the Rending 5+ is probably the most useful part of that, but is a pretty underwhelming weapon for a Lord of War unit. They're just so afraid of giving decent template weapons this edition. So out of these 2 units, if you're going to pick which one you used, I would rather take the Khitan, rules-wise, and just use my Brass Scorpion, counts as the Khitan. Because it's got enough DACA that you can say, yep, it's firing the Gatling gun and the Cleavers of Slaughter. Well, that could be the 2 big pinches on the front of the Brass Scorpion for all it matters. I think that's just a better way to play it. It's just very overpriced for what it can actually deliver. If the Greater Brass Scorpion was just under 400 points, maybe 390, I think that'd probably sit in a pretty happy zone, but you're kind of giving away 50 points just to the Khitan there alone. And the Khitan is probably undercosted for what it's actually capable of delivering on the battlefield. This thing's actually kind of scary to Astartes because of that neg2 leadership modifier on its attacks from that Gatling cannon if it gets in close. And, of course, the incredibly high weapon skill. Now, moving down, we get to the last couple of units. Firstly, the Blood Slaughterers. Now, the Blood Slaughterers are bigger than a Dreadnought. They're a bit bigger than a Leviathan Dreadnought if you took the Leviathan and sort of just put it sideways on the base instead of standing up tall. Now the Blood Slaughterers have, well, Heedless Slaughter again, because we want them to run and get in close and all of those particular buffs, versus, of course, the Greater Brass Scorpion. And, of course, well, Heedless Slaughter, the additional buff to the charge, yeah, it's okay, it'll do the job. But it is nothing to write home about. It's really just a bonus special rule. Where these things shine is getting those Legiones Astartes little buffs to them. Now, having a Dreadnought stat line for only 110 points, that's pretty good. You don't have the 2+ save, but Toughness 6 is nothing to sniff at. Furious Charge, going up to Strength 7, okay. What about the Slaughterer Blade? That's the main weapon on it. Well, here's where we come a bit unstuck. It's not a Dreadnought level weapon. Dreadnoughts have the Gravis Power Fist, Strength 9, AP 2, Brutal 3. Unfortunately, in this case, you're going to get Strength User, AP 3, okay, Melee, Rending 6+. Pretty underwhelming. You don't have any abilities here or weapons that can really upgrade you to be able to hit hard enough to kill things other than power armor. If you run into a Dreadnought, if you run into a unit of Terminators with this, you are going to get messed up because you just won't be able to hurt them. What wounds you do get through will not be instant death, versus the Terminators, who are just going to fist pump you or Thunderhammer pump you with 2s to wound, and you're going to be screaming for your 6+ invulnerable saves to save you. This really is just a power armor killer, and it's a real shame because I thought when this first came out this would be an amazing unit, but time has sort of shown the opposite. You also have the Impaler Harpoon, and the Impaler Harpoon, well, if you take it, you're getting less attacks, and already we've established your attacks are not great. But the Impaler Harpoon was designed to be a weapon which essentially pulls enemies into you, was the way it used to read. And now it's giving you a charge buff, but it's a Strength 6 AP 3 heavy one weapon. It's just not worth swapping the attacks for. So the Blood Slaughterer in this case is if you want to take close combat Dreadnoughts in your army, but you don't want the stigma attached to taking multiple close combat Dreadnoughts, and you want to use up some of those fast attack slots, which are a little bit less sort of contested in the Legion army, then I think the Blood Slaughterer is probably the Demon engine of choice for you, and will suit your playstyle wonderfully. Lastly, out of our Demon engines, we have the Decimator. Now, the Decimator is, well, it's bigger than a Leviathan, somewhat physically bigger than a Leviathan, and a lovely looking model, an old favourite of mine. But we run into a few issues here. For a start, it's 5 points cheaper than a Leviathan, which on the surface sounds great. But the stat line, okay, we've got worse ballistic skill, we've got worse toughness. Those are big killers straight away. The Furious Charge is nice, it's going to get you up to Strength 10 on that charge. But with that charge, well, what are you sort of gaining here? You're not really gaining much to give you that charge. You are a heavy unit. You cannot run. You are only moving 7 inches. There is nothing stopping other Dreadnoughts from charging you and just nullifying the Furious Charge. The Malefic Aegis being 5+ invulnerable is clearly worse than other options that are out there. And the Decimator Siege Claws. What an underwhelming weapon. Strength is User, AP 2, Melee, Brutal 3. So if you get the Furious Charge off, great, you're going to be a strength point higher than a regular Contemptor Dreadnought. But if you fail to get the charge off, you're going to be a strength point lower than a Contemptor Dreadnought. And at that points price, you're the price of 2 Contemptor Dreadnoughts. They are going to provide more staying power on the battlefield. They can do more damage than the Decimator can. And if you want to compare to a Leviathan Dreadnought, well, the Leviathan Dreadnought at Toughness 8 immediately is immune to the entire Strength 4 weapon category. That's kind of a big deal. So, something to be aware of. If you take Iron Hands with this, Traitor Iron Hands, Okay, you're now immune to the Strength 4 category, but you took an entire Legion trait to do it. Not a great trade-off. And when it comes to weapons, these weapons should be a discount in points on the unit, not an increase in points. The Butcher Cannon at 10 points is going to give you the equivalent of a Gravis autocannon of a Contemptor Dreadnought. Well, did we buy a Contemptor Dreadnought and put an autocannon on it? We would do that and go, alright, that's an okay unit still. It's still got that other fist. It can put out a fair bit of close combat punch still. On this thing, you're like, great, I've reduced its firepower to that of a Contemptor Dreadnought, which is half of the points. What if I exchange the second core? Well, I've made a worse Contemptor Dreadnought with 2 autocannons, because again, I could buy 2 Contemptor Dreadnoughts who both have twin autocannons in place of this unit. Not to mention, Decimator also taking up a heavy support slot. Then if we compare it to, again, the Leviathan Dreadnought. The Leviathan Dreadnought, if I want to arm it with a cannon, I might go the Leviathan Storm Cannon for 10 points. If I do that, yes, I'm going to lose half of the range of the weapon, but I'm also going to be gaining Rending on a 5+ instead of a 6+, and I'm going to be gaining Sunder, so I can actually pose a threat to lighter vehicles with this thing. And 6 shots, not 3. So the Leviathan Dreadnought immediately offering a far better choice there. And then we go on to worse stats. So obviously the Leviathan, ever so slightly slower at 6 inches of movement. But with the better ballistic skill, I can make better use of my shooting. With the better toughness, the Leviathan is more resilient. The leadership on the Leviathan is slightly higher. The attacks is the same on the pair of them. But the Leviathan's attacks are always going to be Strength 10 Brutal 3. And I could change one of the cores on the Leviathan to be a Drill Array, which is going to be Strength 12, and is going to give me Armor Bane. So any vehicle or building that it touches is guaranteed to die on contact. The Decimator does not have that kind of hitting power, despite being a larger physically model than the Leviathan, and filled with the Spicy Battery. In addition to that, we also have the Soul Burner Petard on the Decimator. And the Soul Burner Petard is, well, there's no way to say it. It's awful, because it's going to give you a 24-inch range, which is already terrible, Strength 6, AP 4, 3-inch, Breaching 5+, Flesh Bane, Small Blast. It's giving you a plasma cannon with lower strength and only 2/3 of the range, and it's costing you 15 points. Or you could take a Contemptor Dreadnought, which can take a Gravis plasma cannon, which is going to give you a 5-inch, strength 7, AP 4, breaching 4+ round. Much, much better. And of course, with the higher ballistic skill, less scatter. So, not looking great here for the Decimator. Now, where does the Decimator make up for this? Well, in being a heavy support choice, well, it's contesting itself with Leviathans directly. So if you think the Leviathan Dreadnought, kitted out for close combat, is a little bit too spicy in rules for your army, or for your local gaming community, this might not be a bad choice to replace it. You're getting a very, very similar unit. It's just a bit worse for the same points. And I think, like with the previous unit, a viable candidate for replacing Contemptor Dreadnoughts in the valuable category of please don't hate me for bringing Dreadnoughts, I really want you to have fun in the game as well. Which is a growing segment of the community every year. The Contemptor Dreadnoughts don't get fixed. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the Daemon engines. And of course, all the weapons and stat lines are included in this PDF document, which, by the way, is the Depths of Trey Decimia. This is a free PDF download that's available through the Warhammer Community Portal, and this talks all about the Daemon engines of the Horus Heresy. Now, I think demon engines are a wonderful inclusion in armies to make them feel just that little bit more traitorous, that little bit more treacherous. It's just a shame that they've only done a few of them so far, and it doesn't feel like they read the rules or the points values to compare them to other units that exist within the game. Either you think that the points on a Contemptor Dreadnought are fair, and therefore these things are overcosted, or you think that the points on Dreadnought were wrong, and therefore you've pointed these things correctly, but you never changed the Contemptor Dreadnoughts. In any case, you have to compare these things one for one. So I think the Khitan is the clear standout in this particular list, and I think the others are just fun and creative choices that, look, you're not going to lose games if you include them. Okay, they're fun, and I would encourage people to do fun, unorthodox things and include them in your lists, even knowing that they are suboptimal. Just avoid hamstringing yourself deliberately by taking bad weapons like the Soulburner Petard. Ignore those. Take fun weapons on these units, pretty much just arm them for close combat, and throw them out there and have some fun and make your games a little bit more interesting. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. I hope you all like this quick little look at Demon Engines. We're going to do another video on Demon Engines, talking about some other options that are out there, especially kits that we could say count as Legion units or Mechanicum units or Knights or whatever they may be, in order to encourage people to take those particular units in their forces, even if it's on a count as basis, in order to add a little bit of flavour into their armies. Because I think doing something a little bit unorthodox, a little bit left field, but within the constraints of the universe and the lore is a lot of fun, and I encourage people to take that mentality with them. Anyway, that's it for me. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching the episode, and I'll catch you on the next one.